My name is Grant Holloway, and if someone had told me 2 years ago that my life would become a dramatic tale of betrayal, elaborate financial moves, and unexpected redemption, I would have laughed. I was 45 years old, a financial advisor in Denver, Colorado, living a seemingly stable and predictable life. My wife Melanie and I had been married for 12 years. We had a joint investment account worth over $200,000, a suburban home with a mortgage overlooking the majestic Rockies, and a routine that I thought was comfortable. But comfort is sometimes just a facade, and the story I'm about to tell begins with a call that ripped my world apart and forced me to rebuild it piece by piece. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about what I lost, but how I took back control. You'll want to hear it all the way to the end because there's a surprising secret about corporate espionage and a lesson that will make you rethink trust and strategy. It all started on a Tuesday night in March as I sat at my kitchen table reviewing client files. My phone lit up displaying Melanie's name. She was supposed to be at a pharmaceutical sales conference in Miami. I picked it up and her voice came through strangely calm. "Grant, I need to tell you something. I'm not coming home." I put down my pen, my heart racing, but I kept my voice steady. "What's going on?" she replied in the same tone I knew she used when she was pitching tough clients. "I met someone. It's been going on for a while. It's Russell, my boss." I was silent, listening to her breathing on the phone. Then she continued as if stabbing me. "I took out all the money from our joint investment account. My lawyer said it was a smart move. The joint account. The money we had accumulated over 12 years of marriage, something Melanie rarely noticed but always benefited from. I just said I understand." She looked surprised, her voice cracking, revealing real emotion for the first time on the call. "That's it. You understand," I said. "Take care of yourself." Melanie and hung up. I put the phone down face down and opened my laptop. Logging into the financial portal, I saw right away she had initiated a withdrawal for $212,000. But the status was pending approval. My approval. I closed the laptop without doing anything. Let me explain why I didn't panic. I'm a numbers guy, and people like me always see patterns. 6 months ago, I saw the first signs. Weekend conferences missing from Melanie's company calendar. Dinner bills in downtown Denver on nights she said she was out of town. A missed call from Russell at 11 p.m. that she hastily explained away. I didn't confront or argue. Instead, I made a plan. 3 months ago, I restructured our assets, moving the bulk $870,000 into a trust that Melanie couldn't touch. The joint account she thought she drained was just a trap with just enough of a balance to fool her. The system worked exactly as I had designed it. Melanie and I met 17 years ago at a financial conference in Chicago. She worked for Lunara Ventures, a promising pharmaceutical company. She was ambitious, sharp, and knew how to command a room. I was quiet, analytical, always paying attention to details that others missed. We complemented each other. 2 years later, we were married, planning our future with the same precision I had for managing a client's portfolio, weekend hikes, dinners with colleagues, a schedule to build an investment account, and kids in year 5. But the kids never came. After 3 years of trying, the doctor announced in a sterile room that my low sperm count made conceiving naturally nearly impossible. Melanie cried in the car after the appointment. I held her hand, promising to explore other options. But we never did. Instead, she threw herself into her work, and I focused on building a client list at Veltri Dynamics, building a reputation for steady, unobtrusive returns. The real rift began 3 years ago. I planned a weekend in Aspen to celebrate our anniversary. When I told Melanie, she hesitated, then said she had signed up for a training session with the executive team. "I can't cancel, Grant. This is a big opportunity." I went alone, walking the trail she had walked with me. When she called that night, I heard laughter and background music on the phone. The cracks grew wider. Separate vacations became the norm. Conversations revolved around bills or chores. Physical intimacy dwindled to a casual to-do list check. Then, Russell Phillips showed up, her new regional manager. Suddenly, Melanie was volunteering for every committee, board, every conference, every project that involved him. "He values my opinion," she said. "He thinks I'm wasted in my current role." I noticed the change. The phone was always face down. She stepped out to take calls. She set passwords on folders on her laptop. The classic signs of a failed marriage that I had seen in others but never expected to happen to me. I didn't confront her. Instead, I observed, took notes, and prepared. I created spreadsheets, noting dates of strange expenses locations that didn't match her itinerary withdrawals that exceeded our agreed-upon spending limits. One morning, when she left her email open, I saw a hotel reservation confirmation under her and Russell's names. I said nothing. I just adjusted my plans. The morning after the fateful call, I sat in my home office staring at the $212,000 wire transfer request still flashing on my screen. One click and I could deny it. Another and I could approve it and let her walk away with almost everything we'd built. But I did nothing. Instead, I pulled out a stack of documents I'd been working on for the past 3 months. The financial restructuring the trust in my name containing $870,000 separate from the joint account Melanie thought she drained. The doorbell rang. Vanessa, Melanie's best friend from Lunara, stood on the porch looking nervous. She said I came to pick up something, Vanessa said, her hand tightening on the strap of her bag. She didn't come back, Grant. I nodded, ushered her in, poured us coffee that neither of us had drunk. Vanessa said Melanie wanted her jewelry box and winter clothes. I told her the jewelry box was in the safe, and Melanie knew the code. Then Vanessa revealed the real reason. She wanted me to check if the transfer was complete. I opened my laptop, turned the screen around to show Vanessa the words, pending approval. Transactions over $10,000 require double authentication, I said. She'll be mad, Vanessa whispered. It's her choice, I replied. After Vanessa left with a suitcase of designer clothes but no financial confirmation, I drove to the office at Veltree. The routine calling clients, reviewing portfolios was suddenly a blur. I went to the bank on my lunch break, setting the next phase of my plan in motion. By 3 p.m., my phone had 7 missed calls from Melanie. I didn't answer and drove to the office of my lawyer, Thomas, who was both a client and a friend. I showed him the documents, bank statements, showing Melanie trying to withdraw the money, credit card receipts matching Russell's schedule, hotel confirmations. Enough to proceed, Thomas said. We'll file for divorce tomorrow morning, citing financial misconduct and marital abandonment. I nodded, feeling a strange emptiness instead of anger. This wasn't revenge. This was math. Every action had a consequence. 3 days passed, and I didn't answer Melanie's increasingly frantic calls. On the 4th day, I came home to find her standing in the living room, using a key she hadn't returned. What did you do? She yelled, her flawless makeup contrasting with her wild eyes. The money's gone. I put down my briefcase and calmly replied, No, Melanie, the money's right where it is. She held out her phone, which showed a banking message. Transfer declined. Double authorization required. Fix it, she ordered. I went into the kitchen and poured a glass of water. We need to talk about the divorce. She was stunned. Divorce? I'm going to talk about it after we settle down. After we get the money, I clarified. Her face hardened. Half of it is mine. I deserve it, I asked Russell. She paled, but her tone softened quickly. You're too emotional. We should talk it over. I recognized the tactic, the Melanie of dinner parties convincing difficult clients. Thomas Wilson is handling the divorce, I said. My lawyer can contact him. She paced her heels, clicking on the hardwood floors she'd insisted on installing last year. You can't lock me out of our money, Grant. I'll fight. I said, That's my right. My calmness made her even angrier. She snatched the frame from the mantelpiece, a picture of us in Aspen before everything went down, and threw it against the wall. The glass shattered on the floor. Russell was right about you, she hissed. You coward, you're not ambitious. I looked at the broken frame, my smiling face under the cracked glass. I need your keys. She threw the keys on the coffee table, screamed, It's not over, and walked away. I swept up the glass, poured 2 fingers of bourbon, and called Thomas. She's coming, I said. Let her think she's in control, Thomas replied. Your trust is untouchable. The next morning, my assistant at Veltree placed a letter on my desk from Melanie's attorney, Carlton Hayes. The letter demanded the immediate release of the marital assets and threatened to sue for financial abuse. I noticed that Russell Phillips had been sent a copy. So her boss was now openly involved, using his connections to exert pressure. That afternoon, Thomas filed an amended divorce petition, adding evidence of Melanie's attempts to withdraw money and asking for a temporary restraining order to keep her out of my home. They think you're weak, Thomas said. Let them underestimate you. I didn't respond to my lawyer's letter. I waited for their next move, knowing that each aggressive move only strengthened my position. In finance, patience isn't just a virtue, it's a strategy. 2 weeks later, a text message came from an unknown number. Coffee. Important information about Monsieur Feral 2 p.m. Curiosity overcame caution. I went to the cafe, sat in a secluded corner, and watched the door. Jessica Harlow, Lunara's human resources director, walked in. We'd met at company events, exchanged pleasantries. Now she sat across from me, didn't order anything, and placed a USB drive on the table. "I can't let anyone see me with you," she said quietly. "This conversation never happened." I asked, "What's on the USB drive?" "Emails between Russell and Melanie from 14 months ago." I kept my face neutral. "Why are you doing this?" Jessica looked around before answering. "Russell has done this 3 times before. Pursued married women under his command, convinced them to leave their families, promised them promotions. When they cut things off, he dumped them. And Lunara let it go." Her mouth tightened. "His dad was on the board, but now there's more. These emails contain confidential product information shared with competitors." I could feel the chill of this information. Industrial espionage. Jessica nodded. Russell sold research data using Melanie to get files she wasn't supposed to have access to. The FBI is investigating, but quietly. Melanie was either complicit or manipulated. Jessica stood up. "Use this information however you want." After she left, I ordered coffee and plugged the USB into my laptop. The emails confirmed everything: the affair, Russell's plans to leave me, Russell's promise of a promotion and a move to Miami. But the spy angle was new. Screenshots showed Melanie accessing the research database after hours, sending exclusive information to Russell's personal email. Whether she knew what he was doing with it was unclear. An email from 3 months ago caught my eye. Russell wrote, "Once you get rid of the accountant, we'll do everything. Miami office manager, all of it." Melanie replied, "And his financial expertise could be useful." Russell, "Trust me, we don't need him. Just get what we can out of the account and we'll take care of the rest. They were going to use me then, throw it away." I copied the file, then drove straight to Thomas's office. He looked at the emails as I looked out at the mountains. "This changes everything," Thomas said. "The spy angle could lead to criminal charges." I surprised myself by saying, "I don't want her to go to jail. I just want out." Thomas nodded. "So we use this as leverage. She gives up her financial claims, signs a divorce agreement on our terms, and we don't share it with the FBI." That night, I received a formal settlement offer from Melanie's attorney. She wanted 60% of the marital assets, the house, and monthly child support. I forwarded it to Thomas with a line, "Time for a USB drive." The next day, Thomas sent a counteroffer. Melanie would give up all rights to the trust, take a $50,000 lump sum, and sign a non-disclosure agreement about the marriage and Lunara. Attached was an email from a thumb drive, enough to show what we had, but not the whole deck. The lawyer's response came within hours. "We need to meet." The meeting took place in Thomas's office. I arrived early, going over my strategy. When Melanie walked in with Carlton Hayes, her lawyer, she didn't look at me. Hayes, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, spoke first. "We appreciate your willingness to discuss a reasonable settlement." Thomas slid our proposal across the table. "Our terms are non-negotiable." Hayes skimmed it, his smile fading. "Nonsense. Your client offers next to nothing," Thomas replied. "My client offers silence, which in this situation is very valuable." Melanie finally looked at me, her eyes a mixture of anger and fear. "You're blackmailing me," I said quietly. "No, I'm protecting myself." Thomas pulled out the email printouts and placed them in front of Hayes. "This is evidence of corporate espionage," he said. "Federal prosecutors will be very interested." Melanie lost her cool. "You don't understand. Russell said it was just market research, not illegal," I said. "But I accessed the secure database after hours and sent the information to his personal email." Hayes whispered something to Melanie, who shook her head vigorously. Finally, he said, "We need to confer privately." They left the room and Thomas nodded at me. "You're doing well." I admitted, "This is not how I thought my marriage would end." 20 minutes later, they returned. Hayes looked resigned. My client agreed to the terms with one amendment. "I make sure you don't send this email to Lunara or law enforcement." I looked at Melanie, the woman I'd built a life with. Whatever she'd done, sending her to jail wouldn't undo the betrayal. "Okay," I said, "provided the agreement is signed today and the divorce is finalized without further contestation." 2 hours later, it was done. Melanie signed away her claims, took $50,000 and my silence. The house would be sold, the money would go into my trust. No alimony, no further contact. As she got up to leave, she paused. "Is any of this real to you?" The question took me by surprise. Everything is real to me. I answered honestly. That's the difference between us. After they left, Thomas shook my hand. Congratulations, you'll be divorced in 90 days. I nodded, feeling empty despite the victory. What about Russell? I asked. Thomas raised an eyebrow. None of our business. But I said Lunara needs to know who they're letting run their sales department. I pointed to the thumb drive. Thomas considered. Technically, the agreement only prevents you from reporting. It doesn't cover anonymous tips. That night, I created a new email account, sifted through the thumb drive for documents that related only to Russell's actions, not Melanie's. I sent them to Lunara's CEO board and compliance department, and then permanently deleted the account. 3 days later, a small story in the Denver Post business section read, CEO of Pharmaceuticals resigns amid internal investigation. Russell Phillips left Lunara immediately without giving a reason. Melanie texted me once I know it was you. I didn't answer. Some equations balance themselves out. 6 weeks later, I was sitting in Thomas's office signing the final divorce papers. He showed me Melanie's new employment contract obtained through his network. She had taken a job at a small pharmaceutical distributor in Phoenix, an entry-level sales position with a steep pay cut and no fancy office. Russell, rumor had it, was in Miami, unemployed and under FBI investigation. She had to sell her car to pay the rent, Thomas said. I felt no satisfaction just acknowledging the financial reality, actions, and consequences. That afternoon, I received a letter of certification from Lunara. An internal investigation had uncovered my anonymous source. Rather than sue me for accessing proprietary information, they offered me a job as a consultant to their financial compliance department. We believe your expertise and ethical standards will be an asset during the restructuring, the letter read. Jessica Harlow signed it with a handwritten note. Justice come in unexpected ways. I said yes the next day. Let me share a real-life story that I deeply relate to. A few years ago, a friend of mine, Tom, in Boulder, discovered that his wife was having an affair with a coworker. Unlike me, Tom confronted her right away, which led to a fight and a quick divorce. But he wasn't as financially prepared as I was. She took half of the property, leaving Tom struggling with his mortgage. I learned from Tom that emotions can get the best of you. I stayed calm not because I was stronger, but because I knew anger would distract me. If you're facing a personal crisis, take a second to breathe and make a plan. That's the first lesson. I want you to remember strategies for overcoming emotions. 2 months after the divorce, I got an email from Vanessa. Grant, I thought you should know that Melanie and Russell broke up. He didn't make any of his promises. She was struggling but too proud to admit it. She asked about me if I was dating. Vanessa said she hadn't shared anything about me with Melanie. I closed the email without replying. Justice wasn't in Melanie's demise or my financial security. It was in the quiet restoration of truth when the numbers finally balanced out the way they should. A year after the call from Miami, I stood in the foyer of my new house in suburban Denver. Smaller than my old one, but my own, with a view of the mountains from the back porch. My consulting job with Lunara had become a full-time position, heading a new financial compliance department. I was building a team focused on transparency and ethics work that meant more than just wealth creation. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine, a corporate attorney I'd met through Lunara's legal department. We were headed to our third date dinner at a quiet downtown restaurant where we continued talking about trails and regulations, finance, topics Melanie had found boring, but Catherine was as passionate about as I was. I hadn't heard from Melanie in months. Through mutual friends, I learned that she had left pharmacy to teach at a community college in Arizona. A simpler life than she had dreamed of, but perhaps more honest. As I adjusted my tie in the mirror, I realized that the emptiness had disappeared. The betrayal no longer defined me. It was just a painful chapter that led me to something better. The trust fund Melanie had tried to drain now funded my college education. G for students pursuing a certificate in financial ethics. A small way to turn something hurtful into something positive. I locked the door and walked to my car. The mountains loomed ahead, solid and unchanging. Some things could be trusted. Some calculations always balanced out. I was right about the numbers, but more importantly, I finally got the human equation right. If you've ever been betrayed financially or emotionally, remember this lesson: your worth isn't in what someone takes, but in how you build it back. Now, tell me in the comments, how have you overcome a big challenge? Like, subscribe, and share our journey together. Stick with me, because this isn't just a story about what I lost, but how I took back control. You'll want to listen to the end because there's a surprising secret involving corporate espionage, bold financial moves, and a lesson that will make you rethink your beliefs, strategies, and values. I promise you this story will keep you sitting until the end because every twist and turn is a lesson in how to face life's biggest challenges. It all started on a Tuesday night in March, when I was sitting at my kitchen table reviewing client files. I'm a financial advisor at Veltri Dynamics, managing investment portfolios for wealthy clients. My job requires attention to detail analysis and foresight skills I never expected to apply to my own marriage. My phone lit up, revealing Melanie's name. She was supposed to be at a pharmaceutical sales conference in Miami, working for Lunara Ventures, a promising pharmaceutical company. I picked up, and her voice came back strangely calm, as if she'd rehearsed it. "Grant, I need to tell you something. I'm not coming home." I put down my pen, my heart starting to race, but I kept my voice steady, like talking to a client who was panicking about the stock market. "What's going on?" she replied in the tone I knew she used when she was convincing demanding doctors I met someone. "It's been going on for a while. It's Russell, my boss." I was silent, listening to her breathing through the phone. Nothing could have prepared me for what came next. I took out all the money in our joint investment account. My lawyer said it was a smart move. The joint account, the $212,000 we'd accumulated over 12 years of marriage, which Melanie rarely paid attention to, but which always benefited from shopping sprees and fancy vacations. I felt the blood rush to my head, but I didn't scream, didn't argue. I just said, "I understand." Her voice cracked, revealing real emotion for the first time. "That's it. You understand," I said. "Take care of yourself." "Melanie," and hung up. I put the phone down, face down, and opened my laptop. Logging into my financial portal, I saw right away she'd initiated a $212,000 withdrawal, but the status was pending approval, my approval. I closed the laptop without doing anything. You might think I was crazy for not taking action, but let me explain. I'm a numbers guy, and people like me always see patterns. 6 months ago, I saw the first signs. Weekend conferences missing from Melanie's company calendar. Dinner bills in downtown Denver on nights she said she was out of town. A missed call from Russell at 11 p.m. that she hastily explained was a company emergency. I'm not a cynic, but I'm trained to recognize risk. In finance, you don't wait for the market to crash before you act, you prepare. And that's exactly what I did. 3 months before that call, I began restructuring our assets. I transferred the bulk of it, $870,000, to a trust in my name, separate from the joint account. The joint account Melanie thought she drained was a trap with just enough balance to fool her. I'd asked the bank to set up double authentication for any transactions over $10,000, a safeguard Melanie didn't know about. She was too busy texting under the dinner table to read the paperwork I gave her to sign. The system worked exactly as I had designed it, and the next morning, Melanie would discover what pending approval really meant. But let me back up a bit, because to understand this story, you need to know who Melanie and I were. We met 17 years ago at a financial conference in Chicago. I was a young early career advisor who preferred working with spreadsheets to partying. Melanie was different. She worked for Lunara Ventures, a rising pharmaceutical company, and she was the life of the room. She was ambitious, sharp, and knew how to make people listen. I was quiet, analytical, always paying attention to details that others missed. We made up for that. Purred at each other, or so I thought. 2 years later, we were married, planning our future with the same precision I used to manage a client's portfolio. Weekend hikes in the Rockies, dinners with colleagues, a schedule to build an investment account, and kids by our 5th year of marriage. But the kids never came. After 3 years of trying, we went to see a fertility specialist. In a sterile room, he informed me that my low sperm count made conceiving naturally almost impossible. Melanie cried in the car after the appointment. I held her hand, promising to explore other options, adoption, IVF, whatever she wanted. But Melanie didn't want to discuss it further. She said she needed time, and then she threw herself into work. Conferences, client dinners, late nights at the office became more frequent. I too focused on building my client list at Veltri, building a reputation for steady, unobtrusive returns that weathered the market swings. Our home became a way station between her travels and my long hours. The real rift began 3 years ago. I planned a weekend in Aspen to celebrate our anniversary. I booked a small chalet, figuring we'd hike, have candlelit dinners, and reclaim some of what had been lost. When I told Melanie, she hesitated, then said she'd signed up for a training session with Lunara's executive team. "I can't cancel, Grant. This is a big opportunity for the board." I didn't argue. I went alone walking the trails we'd used to walk together, the loneliness weighing more heavily than the cold of the mountains. When she called that night, I heard laughter and background music on the phone. Was the conference fun? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Yeah, just a group party, she said quickly, and I knew she was lying. The cracks grew wider. Separate vacations became the norm. I went fishing in Montana. She flew to San Diego for conferences. Our conversations dwindled to discussions about bills, plumbing, or lawn mowing schedules. Physical intimacy dwindled to casual exchanges, as if we were just fulfilling obligations. I began to wonder if this was normal in long-term marriages, or if we had lost our way. Then Russell Phillips appeared, Melanie's new regional director. Suddenly she was volunteering for every committee, every conference, every project that involved him. He values my opinion, she said one night when I asked why she was working late. He thinks I'm being wasted in my current position. I'm not a blindly jealous person, but I began to see the signs. Melanie's phone was always face down on the table. She walked into the backyard to take calls even on cold Denver nights. She password-protected folders on her laptop, something she had never done before. I had seen these signs in clients who came to me to divide assets after their marriages were broken up by infidelity. But I didn't expect them to happen in my own home. I didn't confront her. Instead, I observed, took notes, and prepared. I created a spreadsheet on my computer noting the dates of strange expenses, a $200 dinner at a fancy restaurant in Denver the night she said she was in Boulder, a hotel bill in Chicago that she didn't mention, withdrawals from our joint account that exceeded our agreed-upon spending limit. One morning, as Melanie left her laptop open to make coffee, I saw an email confirming a hotel reservation under her and Russell's names. Double-room king bed for a business trip she hadn't mentioned. My heart sank, but I said nothing. I closed the browser, went back to work, and adjusted my plans. I began consulting with Thomas, my attorney, discreetly. Just want to make sure the assets are protected? I told him, not revealing details. Thomas nodded, walking me through the options: trust, separate accounts, dual authentication. If anything happens, you won't be caught off guard, he said, and I followed that advice step by step, day by day. The morning after the fateful call from Miami, I sat in my home office staring at the $212,000 wire transfer request still flashing on my screen. One click and I could decline. Another shot and I could have approved and let her walk away with almost everything we'd built. But I didn't. Instead, I pulled out a stack of documents I'd been preparing for the past 3 months: the financial restructuring, the trust in my name, containing $870,000 separate from the joint account Melanie thought she'd drained. I felt a strange sense of calm, like when you know you've made the right move in a long game of chess. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Vanessa, Melanie's best friend from Lunara, stood on the porch looking tense, like she didn't want to be there. She asked me to pick up something, Vanessa said, tightening her grip on her bag. She didn't come back. Grant. I nodded, invited her in, poured the coffee. Neither of us drank. Vanessa said Melanie wanted to get the jewelry box from the bedroom and winter clothes from the closet. I told her the jewelry box was in the safe. Melanie knew the passcode all along. Then Vanessa revealed the real reason for her visit. She wanted me to check if the transfer had gone through. I opened my laptop, rotating the screen so Vanessa could see the words, pending approval. Transactions over $10,000 required double authentication. I said, my voice even. She'll be mad, Vanessa whispered, looking at the floor. It's her choice, I said. I didn't blame Vanessa. She was just a messenger caught between her loyalty to Melanie and her obvious discomfort with the situation. I asked not to pry, but because I really wanted to know. What did she say about Russell? Vanessa hesitated, then sighed. She thought he was her future. He promised to get her a director's job in Miami, a big office, everything she'd always wanted. I nodded, expressionless. How long has she known about him? Vanessa hesitated. 8 months, maybe longer. 8 months. Almost a year of her sleeping next to me, discussing home renovations, planning Christmas vacations, all while living a different life. I felt a pang, but I pushed it down. Will she need winter clothes in Miami? I asked, a hint of sarcasm escaping. Vanessa smiled weakly. She always hated the cold in Denver. After Vanessa left with a suitcase of Melanie's designer clothes but no financial confirmation, I drove to the office at Veltri. The familiar hallways, the ringing phones, the smell of coffee from the break room. It all felt foreign, as if I were walking through a world that no longer belonged to me. I sat at my desk, reviewing portfolios, answering client emails, but my mind was elsewhere. I thought about Melanie, about how she had changed over the years from the woman I had loved to someone I barely recognized. I thought about Russell, a man I had met only once at Lunara's Christmas party with his smug smile and too firm handshake. And I thought about myself. Was I missing something, or was this just the price of trusting too much? On my lunch break, I drove to the bank where I had worked with the same employee for a decade, Sarah. She was the kind of person who remembered her clients' children's names and always had candy on the table. "How was your day, Grant?" she asked, smiling. "Just checking on something," I said, handing her the joint account information. Sarah tapped on the keyboard, then frowned. "There's a big transaction waiting for approval, $212,000. What do you want me to do with it?" I shook my head. "Let it wait." She nodded, not asking any more questions, but I saw her curious gaze. I left the bank relieved that the system was still working, but weighed down by the fact that my marriage was over, even if not on paper. By 3 p.m., my phone had 7 missed calls from Melanie and 3 voicemails. I didn't open them. Instead, I drove to the office of Thomas, my attorney. Thomas was a client of mine before he became a friend, a straight-talking, bourbon-loving man who wasn't afraid to tell the truth. I showed him the documents I'd collected, bank statements showing Melanie trying to withdraw money, credit card receipts matching Russell's schedule, hotel confirmations sent to her personal email. Thomas flipped through them, nodding. "This is gold," he said. "Enough to file for divorce on the grounds of financial misconduct and abandonment of marriage. Colorado doesn't require fault, but these will be important to the financial settlement." I nodded, feeling a strange emptiness instead of anger. This wasn't revenge, I told myself. This was math. Every action has a consequence, a principle I'd built my career on. Thomas looked at me as if assessing me. "Are you okay, Grant? I mean, this isn't easy." I shrugged. "I don't know what I'm feeling." "Probably nothing." He nodded as if he had heard this from countless clients before me. "Let's leave the emotions behind. Let's focus on strategy now. She thinks she's drained the account. Let her think that for a while." I agreed, and we made plans to file for divorce the next morning. As I left Thomas's office, I felt a small glimmer of hope, not because I wanted to hurt Melanie, but because I knew I had the situation under control, at least financially. 3 days passed, and I didn't answer Melanie's increasingly frantic calls. I listened to a voicemail just to see what she was thinking. Her voice was shaking, a mixture of anger and panic. "Grant, what the hell are you doing? Where's the money? Call me back." I deleted the message, not wanting to let my emotions drag me down. On the 4th day, I came home from a long day at the office to find Melanie standing in the living room using the key she hadn't returned when she announced our marriage was over. She looked different, perfect makeup, but wild-eyed, as if she were trying to keep things together. "What did you do?" she shouted. "The money's gone." I put down my briefcase and calmly replied, "No, Melanie, the money's right where it belongs." She held out her phone, which showed a bank message. "Transfer declined. Double authentication required. Fix it." She ordered, her voice shaking with anger. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, even though I wasn't thirsty. "We need to talk about divorce." She froze as if the word divorce had come as a surprise punch. "Divorce? I was going to tell you after we settle down." I looked her straight in the eye. "After we get the money." Her face hardened, and I saw the calculation in her eyes, the Melanie I knew, the one who always tried to win every negotiation. "Half of that money is mine," she said. "I deserve it. I worked. I contributed. I lived in this house with you." I asked, my voice low but sharp. "Russell said that—" Her face paled, and I knew I had hit the nail on the head. She quickly changed tactics, her voice softening, almost pleading. "Grant, I was so emotional when I called from Miami. I don't want to end things like this. We should talk properly, like we used to." I recognized the trick, the Melanie of dinner parties, the one who persuaded demanding doctors to change their prescriptions, the one who got clients to sign contracts with a smile and a few sweet words. I had admired her ability, but now it just made me tired. "Thomas Wilson is handling the divorce," I said. "Your lawyer can contact him." She paced her heels, clicking on the hardwood floor she had insisted on installing last year, saying they made the house more luxurious. "You can't lock me out of our money, Grant," she said, her voice rising. "I'll fight. I have the right." "It's my right," I said. My calm seemed to anger her more than a fight. She snatched the framed photo from the mantelpiece, a picture of us in Aspen taken before our separate vacations, and threw it against the wall. The glass shattered on the floor, the shards glittering in the lamplight. "Russell was right about you," she hissed. You coward, unambitious, spineless. I looked at the broken frame, my smiling face under the cracked glass, and felt a deep sadness, not for what she said, but for what we had been. You need my keys, I said. She dug into her purse, threw the keys on the coffee table, and screamed, "It's not over." "Grant, it never is," and stormed out of the house, the door slamming behind her. I stood there for a moment looking at the broken glass. Then I took a broom and swept it away, picking up the pieces carefully. I didn't want to leave any trace of the chaos. When I was done, I poured 2 fingers of bourbon, which I rarely touched, and sat down on the sofa. I called Thomas. "She's home," I said. "She got her keys back." Thomas chuckled into the phone. "Let her think she's in control. Your trust is untouchable, and we have enough evidence to make her think twice." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "What's she gonna do next?" I asked. "She'll get a lawyer and they'll put pressure on her, but you're 3 steps ahead of them. Just relax, Grant." The next morning, when I arrived at the Veltri office, my assistant Karen placed a letter on my desk. From a downtown law firm, she said, her voice curious. It bore the letterhead of Carlton Hayes and Partners, a prestigious firm with offices overlooking 16th Street in Denver. I opened it and read an immediate release of the shared assets, accusing me of financial abuse and restriction of lawful access. I noticed that Russell Phillips had been sent a copy. So Melanie's boss was now openly involved, using his connections to exert pressure. I took a photo of the letter, sent it to Thomas, and continued working. But in my head, I was calculating my next moves like a chess player, looking 5 turns ahead. That afternoon, Thomas called back. "They're playing a blackmail game, but this letter is just a cover. They have nothing solid." He said he had filed for an amended divorce, adding evidence that Melanie had tried to withdraw the money without consulting me, along with a temporary restraining order to keep her out of my home. "They think you're weak," Grant Thomas said, his voice tinged with amusement. "Let them underestimate you. It only makes them make more mistakes." I didn't respond, but I knew he was right. In finance, patience isn't just a virtue, it's a strategy. And I'd learned that it was true in my personal life too. 2 weeks later, while I was having lunch at a sandwich shop near the office, a text message came in from an unknown number. "Coffee. Important information about Monsieur Betrayal, 2 p.m. today." I stared at the message. Text, pondering. It could be a trap, but curiosity overrode caution. I went to Betrayal, a small place in Capitol Hill, with exposed brick walls and the scent of roasted coffee. I chose a table in a secluded corner, watching the door. 10 minutes later, Jessica Harlow walked in. She was Lunara's human resources director, someone I'd met a few times at company events. We'd exchanged pleasantries about the pharmaceutical market or the Denver weather, but today she looked serious, unsmiling. She sat down, didn't order anything, and placed a USB drive on the table. "I can't let anyone see me with you," she said quietly. This conversation never happened. I kept my face neutral, though my heart was pounding. "What's on the USB drive?" "Emails between Russell and Melanie from 14 months ago." I raised my eyebrows. "Why are you doing this?" Jessica looked around, making sure no one was listening. "Russell has done this 3 times that I know of. Pursued married women under his command, convinced them to leave their families, promised promotions, big offices, all that. When they cut it off, he dumped them. I felt cold, but I wanted to know more, and Lunara let it go." Her mouth tightened. His dad was on the board. But now, there's more. These emails contain confidential product information shared with competitors. I knew what she meant. Industrial espionage. Jessica nodded. Russell sold research data, used Melanie to get files she wasn't supposed to have access to. The FBI is investigating, but quietly. I asked, "Does Melanie know about this?" Jessica shrugged. "Either complicit or manipulated. I'm not sure, but she's in danger." She stood up. "Use this information however you want, but don't contact me again." She left, leaving me with the USB and a cold cup of coffee. I sat there for a while, weighing my options. This USB could change everything, not just my divorce, but Melanie and Russell's future. I drove home, plugged the USB into my laptop in my office, and locked the door to make sure I wouldn't be disturbed. The emails came in hundreds of them, spanning more than a year. I read each one feeling like I was watching a horror movie with me as the main character. There were emails about infidelity, Russell's promises of a new life in Miami, Melanie's affectionate messages about finally being free. But what chilled me were the work emails. Screenshots showed Melanie accessing Lunara's research database after hours, sending files containing drug formulas and clinical trial data to Russell's personal email. One email from 3 months ago stood out. Russell wrote, "Once you get rid of the accountant, we'll do everything. Miami office manager, all of it." Melanie replied, "And his financial expertise could be useful. Russell, trust me, we don't need him. Just get what we can out of the accounts and we'll take care of the rest." They were going to use me, then throw me away. Melanie had even considered using my financial knowledge before Russell brushed it off. I felt a rare surge of anger, but I held it in. Anger would be a distraction, and I needed to be more alert than ever. I copied the entire file, saved it to a separate hard drive, and drove to Thomas's office. He scanned the emails, nodding slowly. "This changes everything," he said. "The industrial espionage angle could lead to criminal charges, not just for Russell, but for Melanie." I surprised myself when I said I don't want her to go to jail. I just want to get out. Thomas raised his eyebrows. "Are you sure?" "With what she's done," I nodded. "I want a divorce clean, and I want her to give up all financial claims. That's all." Thomas nodded. "So we use this as leverage. She signs the agreement on our terms, and we don't share it with the FBI." "What about Russell?" I shook my head. "I don't care about him, but Lunara needs to know who's running them." That night, I received a formal settlement offer from Carlton Hayes, Melanie's attorney. She wanted 60% of all marital assets, the house, and monthly support, a greedy demand that showed she still thought she had the upper hand. I forwarded it to Thomas with the line, "Time for a USB." The next day, Thomas sent a counteroffer. Melanie would give up all rights to the trust, take a $50,000 lump sum, and sign a non-disclosure agreement about the marriage and Lunara activities. Attached was an email from a thumb drive, not the whole thing, just enough to show we had evidence but not the whole deck. Hayes's response came within hours, short and urgent. "We need to meet." The meeting was arranged in Thomas's downtown Denver office, a modern space with glass windows overlooking Bannock Street. I arrived early, sat in a conference room, and went over the strategy with Thomas. "They'll try to negotiate," he said, "but we have the advantage. Just stay calm." I nodded, though inside I was a jumble of emotions. Mixed anger, sadness, and a little relief that it was all over. When Melanie walked in with Carlton Hayes, she didn't look at me. Hayes, a silver-haired man with an expensive suit and a practiced smile, spoke first. "We appreciate your willingness to discuss a reasonable settlement." Thomas slid our offer across the table. "Our terms are non-negotiable." Hayes scanned the document, his smile fading. "Nonsense. Your client offered next to nothing." Thomas replied, his voice even, but sharp. "My client offered silence, which in this situation is very valuable." Melanie finally looked at me, her eyes a mixture of anger and fear. "You're blackmailing me," she said, her voice shaking. I looked her straight in the eye, keeping my voice steady. "No, Melanie, I'm protecting myself." Thomas opened a folder, pulling printouts of a few selected emails from a USB drive. He placed them in front of Hayes, who read them with increasing discomfort. "This is personal information," Hayes protested. Thomas corrected her. "This is evidence of corporate espionage, which federal prosecutors will be very interested in." Melanie lost her composure, her voice rising. "You don't understand. Grant, Russell said it was just market research, not illegal." I replied, my voice still calm. "But I accessed the secure database after hours and sent the information to his personal email. I knew that was wrong." Hayes leaned down, whispering something to Melanie. She shook her head vigorously, but I saw the panic in her eyes. Finally, Hayes said, "We need to confer privately." Thomas nodded. "Go ahead. The FBI will probably spend a lot of time on this too." They left the room, and Thomas turned to me, nodding. "You're doing a good job. They know they have the advantage." I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. "This isn't how I thought my marriage would end," I admitted. Thomas patted me on the shoulder. "No one else does, Grant. But you're doing the right thing." 20 minutes later, they returned. Hayes looked resigned, as if he'd lost a battle he thought he'd win. "My client agrees to the terms with one amendment. You must ensure that you don't send these emails to Lunara or any law enforcement agency." I looked at Melanie, the woman I'd built a life with. Whatever she'd done, sending her to prison wouldn't erase the years we'd shared, even if they were a fading memory. "Agreed," I said, "provided the agreement is signed today and the divorce is finalized without further contest." Hayes nodded. "We need to review the final language." Thomas smiled, pulling out a folder. "It's ready." 2 hours later, it was done. Melanie signed away her claims, took a $50,000 lump sum, and agreed to have no further contact. The house would be sold, the money would go into my trust. No alimony, no contest. As she stood to leave, she paused, looking at me one last time. Is any of this real to you? The question hit me like a knife to the heart. Everything is real to me, I answered, painfully honest. That's the difference between us. She said nothing more, just turned away, and I heard her heels clicking away down the hall. After they left, Thomas shook my hand. Congratulations, Grant. Your divorce will be final in 90 days. I nodded, feeling empty despite my victory. I didn't want this victory. I just wanted my life back, but I knew that wasn't possible. What about Russell? I asked almost instinctively. Thomas raised an eyebrow. None of our business. But I shook my head. Lunara needs to know who they're letting run their sales department. I pointed to the USB drive on the desk. Thomas considered it for a moment, then nodded. Technically, the agreement only prevents you from reporting directly. It doesn't cover anonymous tips. I smiled for the first time that day. Exactly. That night, I sat in my home office, the light from my laptop screen the only source of light. I created a new email account, carefully sifting through the documents on the USB drive, only those that related to Russell's actions, not Melanie's. There were discussions about him selling research data to a rival company, specific instructions to Melanie on how to access the files without being detected. I sent them to Lunara's CEO, board members, and compliance with a brief note. You should know who's running your team. Then I deleted the email account, cleared my browser history, and put the USB drive in a safe. I didn't want to leave any trace. 3 days later, I was reading the morning paper on my iPad when I saw a small story in the Denver Post business section. Pharmaceutical CEO resigns amid internal investigation. Russell Phillips had left Lunara Ventures effective immediately. No official reason given, but I knew. Melanie texted me once from a new number. I know it's you. Why would you do this? I stared at the message for a moment, my finger hovering over the screen, but in the end, I didn't reply. Some equations balanced themselves out, and I can't needed explaining. 6 weeks later, I sat in Thomas's office signing the final divorce papers. He showed me another document, Melanie's new employment contract, obtained through his network of contacts. She had taken a job at a small pharmaceutical distributor in Phoenix, an entry-level sales position, a steep reduction from her previous earnings. No corner office, no fancy business cards. Russell, rumor had it, was in Miami, unemployed and under FBI investigation for shady dealings at Lunara. She had to sell her BMW to pay the rent. Thomas said, his voice tinged with amusement. I felt no satisfaction, just acknowledging the financial reality, actions and consequences. Melanie had chosen her path, and I wasn't the one dragging her down. She did it herself. That afternoon, as I was checking my email at the Veltri office, a certified letter from Lunara arrived. Their internal investigation uncovered an anonymous source, me. Rather than sue me for accessing proprietary information via USB, they offered me a consulting position in the financial compliance department. We believe your expertise and ethical standards will be an asset during this restructuring, the letter read. Jessica Harlow signed it, adding a handwritten note. Justice comes in unexpected ways. I read the letter twice, feeling a warmth I hadn't realized I was missing. I responded the next day, accepting the offer, not for the money, but because I wanted to do meaningful work, something that went beyond simply increasing my client's wealth. But let me share a real-life story that I deeply relate to, because I think it will help you understand why I did what I did. A few years ago, a friend of mine named Tom, who lives in Boulder, discovered that his wife was having an affair with a coworker. Tom is an emotional person, always led by his heart. When he found out, he confronted me, which led to a huge fight and a quick divorce. But Tom wasn't as financially prepared as I was. He had no trust fund, no dual endorsements, no plan B. The result? His wife took half of his assets, leaving Tom struggling with a mortgage and a house that now holds only painful memories. I visited Tom a few months later when he was trying to sell the house to pay off the debt. I wish I had thought ahead, he said, his voice full of regret. I let my emotions take over, and now I'm paying the price. Tom's story haunted me as I began to see signs from Melanie. I didn't want to end up like Tom, not because I was afraid of losing money, but because I knew I deserved to protect myself, not just my assets, but my dignity. I learned that in moments of crisis, emotions are your worst enemy. Strategy, preparation, and calmness, that's what gets you through. If you're listening to this story and feel like you're facing a personal crisis, whether financial or emotional, Take a second to breathe. Don't act on anger. Make a plan. Call a lawyer. Check your accounts. That's the first lesson I want you to remember. Strategy over emotion, and it can save you from unnecessary loss. A few weeks after signing the divorce papers, I started to realize that my life was changing, but not in the way I expected. My consulting job with Lunara wasn't just a temporary gig. They offered me a full-time position as head of their new financial compliance department. I built a team focused on transparency and ethics, reviewing every transaction, every contract to make sure Lunara was never compromised by people like Russell again. This was different from what I had done at Veltri. There, I helped the rich get richer. At Lunara, I felt like I was making a difference protecting a company from the mistakes that could destroy it. But it wasn't all plain sailing. One morning as I was getting ready for a meeting at Lunara, I got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, thinking it might be Melanie, but I picked up. A female voice answered, not Melanie, but Linda, a former colleague of hers at Lunara. "Grant, I don't know if you want to hear this," she said, her voice hesitant, "but Melanie's in trouble." I felt a tightness in my chest, not because I still loved her, but because I knew all too well the consequences of bad choices. "What trouble?" I asked. Linda sighed. She was fired from her job in Phoenix. They found out she lied on her resume, claiming a degree she didn't have. Now she lives in a small apartment waitressing for a living. I was silent, processing the information. Melanie, who used to run fancy dinner parties and sign million-dollar contracts, now working at a diner. I didn't feel gloating, just a vague sadness. "Did she say anything about me?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know. Linda hesitated. She said she regretted it. Not the loss of money, but the loss of you. She thought, "You are the only one who really cares about her." I thanked Linda and hung up, sitting there for a long time, looking out the window. Part of me wanted to reach out to Melanie, not to forgive her, but to understand why she had chosen that path. But I knew that would take me back into the past, and I was struggling too much to move forward. Instead, I focused on my new life. I moved to a smaller house outside Denver, just a few miles from the Rockies. It wasn't as fancy as our old house, but it was mine, and I loved standing on the back porch looking out at the snow-capped peaks at sunset. I started hiking more often, a habit I had neglected in the last years of our marriage. One morning, while I was walking on a trail near Bear Lake, I met Catherine, a corporate attorney who worked for Lunara's legal department. She was walking her dog, a golden retriever named Max, and we struck up a conversation about dogs, favorite trails, and the beauty of Colorado. Catherine was different from Melanie in every way. She was quiet, thoughtful, and loved to talk about financial regulation or the history of the Rocky subjects that Melanie had once found boring. We began to see each other regularly, not on formal dates, but for coffee walks or dinner at small restaurants in downtown Denver. One evening, as we sat at a cozy Italian restaurant, Catherine looked at me and said, "You seem like a planner, Grant, but do you ever let yourself just live?" The question got me thinking. All those years with Melanie, I'd planned everything, my finances, my vacations, even our future, but I'd forgotten how to enjoy the moment. Catherine taught me that little by little. Meanwhile, I continued to hear from Melanie through mutual friends. She'd left Phoenix, moved to Tucson, and started working part-time at a community college teaching sales skills classes. It wasn't the glamorous job she dreamed of, but Melanie seemed more settled, at least emotionally, according to Vanessa. "She doesn't talk about Russell anymore," Vanessa wrote in an email. "I think she's trying to find herself." I didn't respond, but I hoped Melanie was doing it. Not because I wanted her back, but because I believed everyone deserved a chance to make amends, no matter how much pain they caused. As for Russell, I heard he tried to start a consulting business in Miami, but it failed within months. The FBI never filed formal charges, but his reputation in the pharmaceutical industry was ruined. A Lunara acquaintance told me that Russell was now working part-time at a small startup without the CEO title or fancy office. I didn't feel good about hearing that, but I felt a sense of balance, as if the universe had put everything in place. My work at Lunara was growing. I was not only head of financial compliance, but I also began training new employees on corporate ethics and how to spot signs of fraud. One day, as I was preparing for a seminar, Jessica Harlow stopped by my office. "You've done better than we expected," she said, a rare smile appearing. "Thank you for not giving up on this company." I smiled back. "Thanks for the USB." She laughed, the first time I'd seen her relax. "I don't know what you're talking about," she winked, and then walked away. I'd also started giving to charity, something I never thought I'd do. The trust Melanie had tried to drain now funded scholarships for students pursuing a certificate in financial ethics at the University of Colorado. Every year, I met with the scholarship recipients, heard their stories, and felt a pride I'd never felt when I was just managing the portfolio. One girl, Maria, told me that my scholarship had helped her escape a low-paying job and pursue her dream of becoming an auditor. "I want to make sure no one else gets screwed over like my family did," she said. Her words made me think of Melanie, of how she'd been screwed over by Russell, and of how I could have lost everything if I hadn't been prepared. A year after the call from Miami, I stood in the foyer of my new home preparing for my third date with Catherine. We'd have dinner at a quiet restaurant in Lodo, where we could continue to talk about Trail's financial regulations and future plans that, for the first time, didn't feel like they needed to be scheduled in detail. I adjusted my tie in the mirror, realizing that the emptiness that had haunted me was gone. Melanie's betrayal no longer defined me. It was just a painful chapter, but it had led me to a better life, not because I was richer, but because I finally understood my worth. I locked the door, got into the car, and drove back to the downtown Denver. The Rockies loomed in the distance, solid and unchanging, a reminder that some things could be trusted. I was right about the numbers, but more importantly, I learned to understand the human equation. If you've ever been betrayed financially, emotionally, or otherwise, remember this lesson: your worth isn't in what someone takes, but in how you build it back. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about finding balance, and sometimes it comes in the most unexpected ways. But the story doesn't end there. A few months later, I received a handwritten letter, anonymous, sent to my office at Lunara. I opened it, and the familiar handwriting took my breath away. It was Melanie. "Grant," she wrote, "I don't expect your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I was wrong. I let ambition and false promises cloud everything. I'm trying to start over, not to be the same person, but to be better. Thank you for not destroying me, even if you could have. I wish you happiness." I read the letter 3 times, feeling a mixture of old pain and a little relief. I didn't reply, but I put the letter in a drawer as a reminder that even those who hurt us can change, even if it's too late to fix everything. Catherine and I continued to see each other, and our relationship grew into something deeper, based not on plans or expectations, but on respect and the simple joy of being together. One evening, as we were walking along the South Platte River, she took my hand and said, "You know, Grant, I think you're the most trustworthy person I've ever met, not just because you're good with numbers, but because you don't give up." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I used to think trust was boring," I said. She shook her head. "No. That's what makes you special." My work at Lunara also opened up new opportunities. I was invited to speak at a finance conference in San Francisco, sharing how companies can protect themselves from internal fraud. In my speech, I didn't mention Melanie or Russell, but I did talk about the importance of ethics and preparation. People think finance is just about numbers, I told the audience, but it's really about people trust, accountability, and consequences. After my talk, an executive from another pharmaceutical company approached me and asked if I would be interested in consulting for them. I declined, not because I didn't want to, but because I felt I was in the right place at Lunara. But not every day was easy. There were nights when I lay awake wondering what else I could have done to save my marriage. Was I so focused on work, so absorbed in the numbers, that I didn't notice Melanie drifting away? Or was she always the one who would chase Russell's spotlight no matter what I did? These questions had no answers, but they taught me another lesson. Sometimes you have to accept that not everything is in your control. You can only control how you react, and that's what I did well. One day, while I was organizing my home office, I found an old notebook from the early years of our marriage. Inside were notes Melanie and I had written, sketching out our dreams: a house in the mountains, a trip to Europe, a family. I sat down and flipped through the pages, feeling a gentle sadness that was no longer painful. Those dreams were dead, but they had led me to a new life, a life I wouldn't trade for anything. I put the notebook in a box along with other mementos from my past and closed the lid. It wasn't about forgetting, it was about putting it to rest. My story isn't about victory or revenge. It's about resilience, about getting back up when life knocks you down, about finding your worth when others try to take it away. If you're reading this, whether you're dealing with betrayal, loss, or just a bad day, I want you to remember this. You're stronger than you think. Make a plan, keep your cool, and never let anyone else define your worth. Justice sometimes is not about watching others fail, but about seeing yourself succeed in your own way. I'm still on my journey, and I hope you are too. Share in the comments. When have you overcome a big challenge? How did it change you? Like, subscribe, and together, we'll continue to explore stories of strength and redemption. Because in life, as in finance, the right math always finds a balance, and I believe you'll find your own. But my story doesn't end there, and I want you to stay with me, because what happens next isn't just about closing the door on the past. It's about how I learned to open new doors, face unexpected challenges, and find meaning in the smallest things. Life. Life, like a portfolio, is never static. It fluctuates, requiring adjustments, and sometimes you have to take risks to achieve greater returns. One morning, a few months later, as I was getting ready for a day at Lunara, my phone rang with a call from Vanessa, Melanie's old friend. I hesitated before picking up, unsure if I wanted to hear more about Melanie. "Grant, I hope I'm not disturbing you," Vanessa said, her voice laced with concern. "I just thought you should know. Melanie called me last night. She's in Tucson, and she's not doing well." I felt a tightness in my chest, not because I still had feelings for Melanie, but because I knew all too well the price of bad choices. Not doing well in what way, I asked, my voice even, but curious. Vanessa sighed. She lost her job teaching at the community college. They cut the budget and she was new and got laid off. She works part-time at a bookstore now, but she said rent was becoming an issue. She asked me if you would be willing to talk. I was silent, processing the information. Melanie, who used to run fancy dinner parties, who used to fly across the country to sign million-dollar contracts, was now shelving books and worrying about rent. Part of me felt a little sorry, but a bigger part reminded me that this was her own doing. "What does she want from me?" I asked. Vanessa hesitated. She didn't say, but I think she wanted to apologize, or maybe ask about money. I told her I wasn't sure you'd be willing to talk, but I promised to ask you. I thanked Vanessa and said I'd think about it, but as I hung up, I knew I didn't want to open that door again. Melanie had her chance, and I gave her a way out, $50,000, and my silence. I owed her nothing more. But that call made me think back, not just about Melanie, but about myself. I began to wonder if I had missed something in the years we had been together. Had I been so focused on work, so absorbed in numbers and portfolios, that I hadn't noticed Melanie drifting away? Or had she always been someone who would chase the spotlight of people like Russell, no matter what I did? These questions had no clear answers, but they led me to do something I had never done before: join a support group in Denver for people going through divorce. Not because I felt weak, but because I wanted to understand more about myself and what had happened. The group met every Wednesday at a community center near Cheeseman Park. The first time I sat in the back row, feeling out of place among strangers sharing their stories. There was a woman, Ellen, in her 50s, who told of her husband leaving her after 25 years for a younger coworker. There was a man, Mike, who talked about losing custody of his children after his wife used personal secrets against him in court. I didn't say anything during the first session, just listened. But I realized something: I wasn't alone. Everyone in that room had been betrayed in one way or another, and they were still trying to move forward. It gave me a new perspective, not on Melanie, but on human resilience. The second session, I shared my story, albeit a short version. I told of the call from Miami, of Melanie trying to withdraw the money, and how I had prepared. When I talked about trusts and dual-wielding Mike, the man who lost custody of his children, laughed. "You're a genius, Grant. I wish I was that smart." Ellen, the woman whose husband had left her, asked me, "But how do you feel? I mean, you won financially, but what about your heart?" That question gave me pause. I admitted that I tried not to feel anything because emotions seemed too dangerous. But I also said that I was learning to let them in little by little, thanks to my new job, to Catherine, and to meetings like this one. The support group became an important part of my life. I began to see the divorce not as a failure, but as an opportunity to understand myself better. One evening, after sharing Melanie's letter, Ellen invited me for coffee at a small cafe near the community center. "You know, Grant," she said, stirring her latte, "the hardest thing isn't forgiving the person who hurt you, it's forgiving yourself for not seeing it." Her words got me thinking. I'd been blaming myself for not recognizing Melanie sooner, for trusting her for so long. But Ellen was right. I needed to let go of that self-blame to truly move forward. Meanwhile, my job at Lunara was opening up new opportunities. In addition to leading the financial compliance department, I was asked to work on a special project, building an internal fraud detection system based on artificial intelligence. This was a field that was completely new to me. OAN was new to me, but I loved the challenge. I worked with a group of young software engineers who called me digital uncle because I always carried a notebook to take notes instead of using an app. One of them, Priya, a 25-year-old MIT graduate, became my reluctant tech mentor. "Grant, you need to be in the 21st century," she laughed, showing me how to use a project management app. In return, I taught her how to analyze financial data to spot unusual transactions. Our collaboration not only made the project a success, but also made me feel younger, as if I was discovering a part of myself I had long forgotten. That AI project turned out to be a turning point for Lunara. The system we built detected a series of suspicious transactions from a small branch in Atlanta, involving a mid-level employee deliberately underreporting sales figures to earn higher commissions. When I presented this finding to the board, Jessica Harlow, who had given me the USB, stood up and applauded. "This is exactly why we need you, Grant," she said. After the meeting, she took me aside. "Have you ever thought about writing a book about financial ethics, about what you learned?" I laughed, thinking she was joking, but she was serious. "Your story, not just about Lunara, but about how you overcame your personal situation, could inspire many people." The idea of a book kept popping into my head, but I wasn't ready. I was still busy with work with Catherine and with finding myself. Catherine and I began spending more time together, not just in Denver, but also exploring Colorado. One weekend, we drove to Estes Park, staying at a cabin near Rocky Mountain National Park. We hiked to Dream Lake, where the water reflected the snow-capped peaks. As we sat on a rock eating homemade sandwiches, Catherine turned to me. "Do you ever think we met for a reason?" she asked. I looked at her, her brown hair blowing in the wind, and smiled. "I don't believe in fate, but I'm starting to think the universe has a way of arranging things." My life seemed to be on track, but then an unexpected challenge arose. One morning, while I was checking my email at the Lunara office, I received a notice from the bank that administered my trust. There was a new legal dispute, not from Melanie, but from a law firm representing a third party, claiming that part of the trust assets belonged to a joint investment Melanie had made before our divorce. I immediately called Thomas, who assured me that the claim was weak and probably an attempt to extort money. "They're sniffing around," he said, "but we'll handle it." This dispute, however, forced me to dig deeper into Melanie's financial dealings before we split. I discovered that she had made a small investment in a biotech startup using money from a joint account without my knowledge. The company was now highly valued, and the original investors, including Melanie, were entitled to a stake. But because the assets had been transferred to my trust, the law firm argued that I was holding Melanie's shares illegally. I felt an old anger rise up, not about the money, but because Melanie seemed able to drag me into her troubles even after we were divorced. Thomas and I worked with a team of lawyers to counter this claim. We produced documents showing that Melanie had relinquished all rights to the property in the divorce settlement, including any investments. But the process dragged on for months with hearings and piles of paperwork. One afternoon, as I was reviewing legal documents in my office, Catherine stopped by with a box of cookies from her favorite bakery. "You look like you need a break," she said, placing the box on the table. I smiled wearily. "I think I need a permanent vacation." She sat down, looking at me seriously. "Grant, you've been through worse than this. This is just a small setback. Don't let it drag you down." Catherine's words helped me regain my composure. I realized that this dispute wasn't about Melanie or money. It was about taking control of my past. I decided not to let it define my future. Finally, after 3 months, the court dismissed the law firm's request, confirming that the trust was legally mine. I breathed a sigh of relief, but I also learned a new lesson. Even when you think you've closed a chapter, the past sometimes tries to find a way to come back. It's important to be strong enough to keep that door closed. During this time, I started a blog, not a book, like Jessica suggested, but a place to share my thoughts on finance, ethics, and resilience. I called it Numbers and Facts, a simple name that reflected my belief that the truth always finds a way to surface, like the numbers that eventually balance out. The blog started small, with just a few readers from the support team and colleagues at Lunara, but it quickly gained traction. One of my posts about how to spot the signs of financial fraud in a company was shared on LinkedIn and received thousands of views. A publisher even reached out asking if I'd like to turn the blog into a book. I said I'd think about it, but deep down I knew I wasn't ready to commit to such a large project. Catherine is my blog's biggest fan. She reads every post, leaves witty comments under a pseudonym, and frequently suggests new topics. One night while we were having dinner at her house, a homemade pasta dish that she proudly called a work of art, she said, "You know, Grant, your blog is about more than just finances. It's about helping people find their power. You're making a difference." Her words stopped me in my tracks. I'd never thought of blogging that way, but she was right. Each post was a way for me to turn what I'd been through, betrayal strategy, redemption, into something that could help others. One day while I was walking Catherine and Max, her dog, in Washington Park, I got an email from a blog reader. This person, a woman named Sarah from Colorado Springs, wrote that my story had inspired her to leave a toxic marriage. My husband controlled everything, including the finances, she wrote. But reading about how you protected yourself made me realize I could do it too. I opened my own account and am planning to leave. Thanks. I read the email to Catherine and she took my hand. See, Grant? You're someone's hero. I laughed, shaking my head. I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who works with numbers. But inside, I felt a new sense of pride, not because I had beaten Melanie or Russell, but because I was helping others find their power. My life continued to evolve in ways I hadn't expected. I started a book club in Denver where I met people who shared my interest in history and biography. One book we read about a 19th century financier who overcame scandal to rebuild his reputation got me thinking about my own journey. I realized that my scandal, or rather the Melanie and Russell scandal, didn't define me. It was just part of the story, and I was writing new chapters every day. Catherine and I also began planning a big trip, not a weekend in Colorado, but a real journey. We decided to spend 2 weeks in Italy exploring Rome, Florence, and the Amalfi Coast. I'd never left the United States before, and the idea of going so far away was both exciting and terrifying. Catherine, who had traveled all over Europe when she was young, helped me make a list of must-sees: the Pantheon, a small gelato shop in Florence that she swore was the best in the world, and a small cliffside town in Positano. "This is going to be our adventure," she said, her eyes lighting up. I nodded, feeling an excitement I hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, my charity work expanded. In addition to the scholarship, I started sponsoring a personal finance training program for divorce survivors in partnership with the community center where the support group met. I taught classes on budgeting, asset protection, and recognizing financial red flags. One student, a man named David, came up to me after a class. "I lost everything in the divorce," he said. "But you made me think I could start over. I just opened my first savings account in 10 years. Moments like that made me feel like my work had meaning, not just at Lunara, but in the community. But the past still had a way of creeping back in. One day, as I was preparing to give a talk at a local college, I got a call from Thomas. "Grant, I have some bad news," he said. "Melanie just filed for reconsideration of the divorce agreement. She claims she signed it under pressure and wants a piece of the trust." I felt my blood rush to my head. "She can't do that, can she?" "The agreement is clear," Thomas assured me. "She doesn't have a strong legal case, but she's trying. She's probably desperate. I'll handle it, but you need to prepare for a little battle." That battle lasted 6 months longer and more intense than I expected. Melanie hired a new lawyer, a more aggressive Carlton Hayes, and they tried to argue that I had manipulated her during the divorce. I had to hire a separate team of lawyers to defend the trust, and the legal fees began to mount. There were days when I felt exhausted, wondering if I would ever really be free of Melanie, nigh or not. But Catherine was always there, reminding me that I had survived worse. "She can't take away what you built," she said one night as we sat on the sofa with a glass of wine. "You're stronger than she thinks." Eventually, the court denied Melanie's request, but not before I had to testify in a hearing. Sitting in the witness box facing Melanie's attorney, I told my story not with anger, but with clarity. I explained how I had structured the trust to protect our assets, how Melanie had tried to withdraw the money without consulting me, and how I had given her a fair way out. When I left the courthouse, I felt relieved, not because I had won, but because I had told the truth and been heard. After the hearing, I didn't hear from Melanie again. Vanessa told me she had moved to New Mexico, worked for a small nonprofit, and seemed to have found a more peaceful life. I didn't know if she had really changed, but I hoped she had learned something as I had. As for Russell, I heard he had left Miami and was working part-time at a small consulting firm in Texas, far from the limelight of the pharmaceutical industry. I didn't feel any gloating, just a sense of balance, like everyone was dealing with the consequences one way or another. Catherine and I finally made it to Italy. It was a magical 2 weeks, filled with moments I'll never forget, standing in the Pantheon as the light streamed through the dome, eating gelato in Florence, and holding Catherine's hand on a cobblestone street in Positano. As we sat on the balcony of a small hotel overlooking the Mediterranean, I turned to her. "Thank you for being here," I said. "Not just in Italy, but in everything." She smiled, taking my hand. "Thank you for letting me into your world." When I returned to Denver, I felt like a new person, not because I had forgotten my past, but because I had learned to live with it. I continued to blog, lead compliance at Lunara, and support the community. One day, while I was speaking to a group of students about financial ethics, a young woman raised her hand. "How do you know when to trust someone?" she asked. I thought about Melanie, about Russell, about Catherine, and about myself. "You never know," I said. "But you can trust yourself, your ability to prepare, to learn, and to move forward no matter what."